when I watched the entire series of We Bear Bears, I honestly think that some of the characters, mainly two, honestly had the least screen time and the least development. Now, I understand that this show isn't PG, it's TVY7, which means it's for children at the age of 7 who are old enough to watch this, but at the same time, I honestly think that considering that this show only had 4 seasons and a movie to wrap up everything, despite the fact that there were few plots and characters that didn't get any kind of closure when it comes to the arcs, I honestly think that We Bear Bears could have been a lot more better if it actually had a 5th season. And before you ask, I'm still fine with this show getting a spinoff, but at the same time, considering that people are so upset that Trick Moon has been rejected by Cartoon Network because of the We Bear Bears spinoff, I honestly had to think of what the fan base of Cartoon Network really wants from the network in general. Anyway, I honestly think that this episode, Panda's Date, where we get the introduction of another character, is honestly one of the weakest episodes for not only in this season, but also the entire series of We Bear Bears. And trust me, when I first watched this, I did like it, but considering that the future episodes that are going to be much more better and won't repeat the same mistake as this episode did, I honestly think that Panda was really at his worst, even at the fact that this episode aired during the week where We Bear Bears premiered. Seriously, this is one of those episodes that premiered at the end of July, which is, at the time in 2015, We Bear Bears was new, and by that point, I honestly think that for anyone who's new to the show, especially from the first episodes, would instantly say that this episode will be one of the weakest that they've seen so far. This episode begins with the bears eating samples from most of the stands in the marketplace. And to be quite honest, considering the fact that the bears and most of their habits is to eat as many food, you should probably expect them to actually do something like this. I mean, the only good thing is that they don't steal anything. They're just eating samples of the market's foods and stuff like that. And then when Panda encounters a guy who really wants someone to eat his cookies because he will take it seriously, he eats his cookies, but he realizes that those nuts, and he has allergies when it comes to eating nuts or anything. We've learned in this episode that Panda has allergies, and because he has allergies, his face starts blowing up, if that's how allergy is supposed to be like. I'm not an expert on allergies, but all I know is that it makes your face blow up or something, which causes Grizz and Icebell to freak out that Panda is about to die because of his allergy. But Lucy came out of her marketplace after seeing the scene. She uses an E-pipe pen, if I did pronounce it right, and stabs it on Panda. And this is where we get the love at first sight cliche, which, compared to what we've seen in the other Valentine's Day episodes from before, even if they're not Valentine's Day episodes, I honestly think the way that they execute this scene between Panda and Lucy is a lot more different compared to other episodes. And when Panda saw Lucy for the first time, he fantasizes about her while singing Go Be Selling Sunshine, which it's an alright song. When it comes to my opinions on the mini songs in We Bear Bears, despite being less than a minute long or longer, though okay to make this show unique in its own way, despite the fact that there are other cartoons that done the same thing. And Grizz has this ideal on having Lucy to hang out with them while they go do activities in the park or forest and stuff like that. And to be quite honest, the first half of this episode is really solid when it comes to the introduction of Lucy. But at the same time, the second half instantly damages this episode's credibility. And the reason I say that is because Panda is really unlikable. I mean, let's go take a look at what he's doing in the first half of this episode. Panda really wants to hang out with Lucy because, of course, he has a crush on her, but Grizz and Icebell gets in the way to the point that Panda has a grudge against his brothers all because they'll keep getting in the way of his crush. You know, it's one thing to make an episode about love at first sight with an interesting twist, but with this type of cliche of having one character being away from a certain character because of the brothers or friends getting in the way, it honestly damages this episode's credibility when it comes to the solid opening in the second half of this episode. I get that this episode aired at the final week of July of 2015, which is at the same time We Bear Bears premiered, but I honestly think that how they execute this episode with an interesting opening of Love at First Sight with an allergy pen thing, that would have been a good way to actually make the second half of this episode to show Panda that he can be himself while also trying to prove that he's just like Grizz and Icebell instead of being in the dark. Look, I get that it's obvious that Panda and Lucy are never going to go together. It's just basically those type of plots that you've seen before when it comes to underage people, despite the fact that Panda is grown up, hanging out or having a crush with a lady who did something that actually caught their attention. However, it doesn't make this episode a lot more better considering that we get an introduction of Lucy, who is probably one of the most underused characters I've ever seen, next to Num Num. Lucy is one of the first supporting characters to make an appearance in this show, next to Chloe, and this was before Ranger Tapes and Charlie make their first appearance as the series goes on. And Lucy only had 4 episode appearances. She didn't even appear at all in season 2, and everyone's tube, she only appeared at the end during the theme song singing, where she sings the We Bear Bears song extended. So yeah, she had the least appearances out of all the supporting characters. I don't know if it's either the fact that the voice actor voicing Lucy is expensive, or the fact that they don't want to push limits when it comes to the relationship of Panda and Lucy, but in all 4 episodes, they know how to make the relationship limited when it comes to a human and an animal pairing up. I'm trying to actually understand what they're trying to do with this show and Lucy in general, but just by looking at the fact that she only had 4 episode appearances is honestly really depressing. Because the thing is, in the second half of this episode, Panda completely traps Icebell and Grizz into a closet so that he can have Lucy all to himself. And Lucy doesn't do much in this other than the fact that she's just hanging out with the bears, which is okay, but they don't do much with her when it comes to her feelings towards Panda. Not like romantic feelings, just ordinary feelings towards Panda. When Panda heads to the restaurant while his brothers are supposed to be with him, Lucy questions onto why Grizz and Icebell isn't with them, and Panda said that they're completely sick and they vomit everywhere in the cave, which is so horrible that Lucy won't be able to do a thing to help them, even though that she might be able to. And for the second half of this episode, when Grizz and Icebell gets out of the closet after counting to 1,000, they try to get inside the restaurant in order to stop playing the hide-and-go-seek game with Panda, which is what Panda has been tricking Grizz and Icebell before he left the cave. And then when they get into the kitchen, one of the workers actually think that the bears are actually whales, so that they put the outfits on and then give them the food, and then they expect them to place them on the tables with the customers. I actually found that joke really funny, but this also leads to one of the biggest issues with this episode. Panda takes Lucy to a spot of the restaurant just to avoid Grizz and Panda. Yeah, this is what this episode really falls flat on the ground when it comes to Panda's motivation in this episode. He's instantly avoiding Grizz and Icebell, thinking that they're gonna get the attention again, while him being in the dark again. I honestly found it really difficult to take this episode seriously. I mean, Grizz and Icebell isn't aware of what Panda is truly doing when it comes to his motivations, but it doesn't excuse the fact that Panda is just really unlikable on just dragging Lucy around in the restaurant just to prevent getting any attention from Grizz and Icebell. And in all honesty, the ending where we see Lucy not being hungry anymore because of the fact that Panda keeps dragging her around, I honestly don't blame her. And that actually hurts the majority of this episode, is the fact that Lucy doesn't do much other than just being a love interest to Panda. Chloe, who made her first appearance in the previous episode, did multiple things just because she's a very young child while also being in college with grown-ups. And I'm saying this is because just because that she's intelligent doesn't mean that her talented personality is her only one and only trait. She can do other things, and it's honestly sad that Lucy doesn't get the same treatment that Chloe did as the series goes on. And this brings me back to my Num Num comment. Lucy and Num Num are the most underused characters when it comes to their appearances in the show. And once we get to We Bear Bears month coming in July, which is going to be the 6th anniversary of We Bear Bears, I'm going to talk about nearly all the episodes involving Lucy. Spoilers later, but at the same time, I really need to discuss everything about Lucy and the fact that she is the most underused character in We Bear Bears. Granted, she isn't as underused as Num Num, but at the same time, Num Num was a hateable character, while Lucy is just a very respectful character. Getting back to Panda, I'm really serious. The way that he just drags Lucy around to different tables, only just to go under a table, is honestly a little too far. Even the fact that his character isn't supposed to be as smart as the other characters. And in all honesty, I honestly think that for how this episode ends with him eating Lucy's order and completely throwing up and causing destruction with him being in the hospital because of his allergies, I have no idea what the alternative ending would have been like if it had one. Now, yes, Panda was remorseful for what he did at the restaurant, but at the same time, it honestly doesn't make this episode a lot more better since that the ending is mostly predictable. And besides, what Grizz said about you probably won't have a chance with her, that pretty much makes sense. In my opinion, this episode isn't one of the worst We Bear Bear episodes I've seen from the show, and it's better than Camp Lazlo's Valentine's Day episode, but it's not even mediocre enough to be watchable from my point of view. I mean, sure, there are people who may enjoy this episode, and it does introduce Lucy, but like I said, since that she makes limited appearances in this, I honestly don't know what to expect if she did actually have more appearances. That way, my point of view from this episode would have been a lot more higher. But as of right now, this episode gets a 5 out of 10. There's only one more video to culminate Valentine's Half Month 3, and you already know what it is.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole